I'm quite happy to kick it.
I think we have ended. Welcome back, by the way, to the second segment, colleagues. We ended on a high note. Maybe before, George, you take over, let me just remind ourselves what we reflected on before we went on to break. We are saying that what Andisa has brought to our attention is the fact that as HR, we need to be versatile. Yeah, we need to be, and then Dr. Gule mentioned also that we pick up from the conversation that it's very important to be very intimate with our business. We are there as HR people because there is a business there to support, and we need to be close to our people and customers. We need to know where is business making money and where is business losing money, and how do we come in, and that way we become relevant. We must understand the entire ecosystem. I like that because that suggests that we are going to have to invest time in understanding what is the ecosystem. Is it changing? Is it remaining? I mean, is it remaining the same? What has changed? That is another conversation we can have. And then then Dr. Gulu said, how do we milk it? I guess he suggested, how do we turn it into something profitable for ourselves? Building the humane workspaces. These changing workspaces still require us to make them humane. And what kind of workers are we? That is a question. I think every HR professional needs to answer that. And we need to go beyond the four walls of our offices and reaching out into communities that we serve. And then we agreed that we're going to we can't answer all those questions, all those points, but we want to spend this segment on 3 points. Number one, the role of HR with regard to ethics. And Dr. Gule mentioned the example of what comes out in the Zondo Commission suggests that we should be responsible as HR for bringing type of people into business who might not really be respecting governance and ethics. And secondly, how do we measure performance now that we have people working from home? It's no longer easier to see if people are doing their work or they are doing the right things. And then the third point was that of mental wellness. And then George added by saying, what is the role of coaching in addressing issues of mental wellness? And I added and say, we also need to think about work-life balance for the HR professionals. Those are the points we want to address, and I will hand over to George to start the conversation.
Yes, for me, really, the issue of mental wellness of employees around the pandemic is such a big one. Many people have been impacted, and it has had such profound impact on them. What is Cisco doing to handhold or to guide people around this? Maybe if you could touch on the issue of coaching for employees.
Absolutely. So let me maybe start with the first part of your question, just around mental or employee wellness. So for me, employee wellness isn't just mental wellness, right? And if we look back just to sort of what the pandemic has ravaged through our society, what we know is that there's a social aspect of of well-being. There's a financial aspect of that, so people's jobs have either been impacted, people were at some point asked, or otherwise were told that they will be taking pay cuts just to keep the numbers above, to make payroll in some organization. And then, of course, there's been the emotional part of it, right? And I alluded to it a little earlier on, when I spoke about also survivor's guilt, right? So people who lived, with families where either they lost one or two members who lived with them, and the guilt that they carry, I think as they move forward, and as they try to reclaim, life as they now know it, that also has a material impact to how productive people are and how people show up in in executing their roles and their functions. And then I think lastly, the physicalness or physical well-being, right? So, and I mean, you see these jokes and memes on social media, about, I mean, in fact, I think I've been guilty of this as well, of saying, oh, it's pandemic weight, right? People see you for the first time, these last couple of weeks, and, we all are looking a little different, a little plumper for some, and for others have lost, significant amount of weight. I mean, there's a colleague who lost 30 kgs, and it wasn't a happy weight loss. It was due to the enormous amount of stress that the pandemic has presented to her as a young woman who was a breadwinner, and these are things that we need to be to be consciously aware of, and so I think when we engage with our EAP program, and I think I love what we've done at Cisco in that we really have been very conscious, I think, in using our listening tools to understand these 4 pillars, right, around emotional, financial, social, and physical, in terms of what do our people need. And I think the blessing and the upside has also been that our wellness partners really have come to the party, right? They've rechanged, I think, their product offering. I think of just last week, in fact, I have Discovery coming to my home tomorrow to come and do the assessments that ordinarily I would have had to have at the office when we had, the mental, the employee wellness day, right? Historically, that's where we all did our testing. That's where we either all got our points, for vitality, et cetera, et cetera. And, and you see now companies like Discovery rolling out, these kinds of programs, where they have nurses. So my family and I are being tested here tomorrow in the comfort of our home. We will try our level best to provide a conducive environment for the healthcare professional that's coming into our space, in terms of being, compliant, to the COVID restrictions, or wearing our masks, opening our windows 30 minutes prior she arrives, and just making sure that I think we're doing our little bit, whilst I think our health care professionals are showing up for us. And so for me, I think it's really important that I think we really lean into these things and to understand some of these things, because ultimately, some of these things are really impacting, I think, people's, outputs. At work, and I alluded to it earlier as well, that we've had the partnership of Randstad. We've introduced also globally, programs, for people who are living with elderly parents. There's a lot of people where the pandemic has forced people to move back home, wherever that may be. And often that has meant living with people who are elderly, right? So how do we support the elderly folks that live with you to also give you the runway for you to be the best version of yourself as an employee? So from a social perspective, it's been really important. I look at, some of the conversations that have been driven from a social media perspective around, organization taking a stand where social impact is concerned, right? We've seen the movement of Black Lives Matter from the US. We have seen the uprising in Nigeria of young Nigerians, pushing back against their government. We've seen the growing political and socio-economic impact, with the Zimbabwe uprising. Also, all of these happened during the pandemic. And so it's been important for us as corporates, I think, to take a stand around social issues, and to support our people. I know many of our colleagues in some of these countries have been at the forefront of fighting, and being good civic duty citizens, right? And standing up for their civic rights and their civic duties. So what are we doing then about it? So when they eventually come back and reintegrate, are we conscious that those 4 pillars will then somewhat come into play? And what kind of environment do we then introduce to ensure that, it's a conducive environment, I think, for people's healing? Because that really is, the place we've been as the world is, we all need to show up for each other's healing. And I will say, perhaps to round it off, that yes, I think our wellness partners in different geographies have been very, very good in terms of, I think changing the product offering and how it's offered. So I think that's the one question. And then I think your second question was centered around coaching, right, and the importance of coaching. And I think as we've grown, I think as we've evolved the last couple of years, if you look at the learning models, I mean, I think what's been more prevalent the last couple of years is the 70-20-10 learning model, right? And it really encompasses three, fundamental pillars. The first pillar is the 70%, which is, learning and developing through experience, right? So it speaks to coaching, it speaks to mentoring, it speaks to, sometimes having executive sponsors, those that are privileged to have, tapping into industry bodies, like the IPMs of the world, and I think, learning through other experts in your field. And I think that speaks to a really big chunk of what learning is and what it ought to be for the future. The second part of it, is the 20% that speaks, through learning through like experience, right? So relational intelligence, right? I spoke earlier about the role of HR being pertinent, in us fostering, this connection economy, right? So how are we really connecting with each other? So how much of these tools do we use to leverage what that growth needs to be? And then lastly, which has been a bit of a flip from what things were maybe 20 years ago, or maybe even 10 years ago, right? And that's learning through structured programs, right? So this is certifications, this is, the courses online, etc. And you're starting to see your learning repositories and companies like, the likes of lynda.com, Degreed, and coming up, I think, and maybe decompressing learning from like 3 months, extensive courses to now 3-day courses. Now, I'm not saying that we're all going to be running around with 3-day MBAs, because that would not that would not be great. But I mean, there's certainly now opportunities to decompress learning and making it bite-sized, to ensure that, again, we're speaking to this holistic ecosystem, conscious of, people's needs and across, I think the different cycles. I hope that answers your question, George. If I haven't, please shoot back to me.
You have answered it. Just to say, practically from your experience,
Yes.
how have you handled employees who have really been on the brink? Practically, how have you done that?
So I mean, the short and end of it is that we've shown a great deal of compassion. I think we've had to rethink carefully the redistribution of work. So I think whilst we are supporting people, it's been important for us to also build our bench muscle, if you will, right? So if George is away because George has has had a tragedy in his family, or he's just emotionally not coping, so what does the bench muscle in George's space look like? And again, for us, I think the idea of dynamic pods and super teams, and I think segmenting people across projects rather than roles, I think has helped to alleviate the pressure, to ensure that we're not dropping any catches in terms of, I think, our output and our delivery to our customers. And I think that approach has served us incredibly well.
Yeah, listen, you are very, very generous as a as an HR practitioner, both in terms of the knowledge that you're dishing out, as well as in offering yourself. I mean, you and I have gone now a couple of months back, and each time I've called upon you, you have just been generous, and I want to appreciate you for that. That you are that kind of person. And having spoken about wellness, and I just want to ask you, and I ask this question because if there's going to be wellness, then there must be psychological safety in the workplace. That if you are going to make the workplace a humane workplace, there must be psychological safety, meaning that people must be themselves, must not be fake, must present as they are, and must not fear. How? And I'm asking a couple of questions here, and you can take whichever, or I'm making inferences to questions. So, how important is psychological safety if we are going to create a humane workplace, a workplace that really enables people to be mentally fit, to be mentally well? How important is that? That's my first question. The second question linked to that is the whole thing around ethics. Because again, we have hotlines, we have fraud lines, but if people are not feeling psychologically safe, they're not going to use those lines because they are not going to trust this. Okay, so that's the second thing I would like you to talk to. And lastly, we in our country, South Africa, we have been very unfortunate. We have been listening to stories from the Zondo Commission that are not flattering at all. We have listened to senior managers, senior leaders in organizations, both private and public. I want to put it to you, Andisa, that we in HR are responsible for bringing the hooligans, the psychopaths into organizations, and they do the nonsense that they do. Would you accept that statement? And if you want to defend yourself, how do you defend yourself in the face of what has come out of the Zondo Commission? So a number of questions there, take your pick.
Well, no pressure at all, Doc. I mean, really light up the hot seat, light it up. I think let me just take a couple of steps back because I want to systematically try and answer your questions as much as possible because I think there's value in unpacking all of these themes. The first thing you asked was just around psychological safety. And it's incredibly important. Our job as culture custodians is for us to not only create perception that we are fair and we are just and we know how to be ethically sound and to navigate gray areas, but we need to be able to demonstrate that is a reality. And until we can demonstrate that and people see and feel in our businesses that truly if they come to report a matter to Andy, that the matter will be taken up and something will be done about it. It's not going to be shoved under the carpet. And so I don't have the luxury of riding on the cocktails of perception. My job is to action and my job is to be seen and also for people to understand that I am ethically sound. And I also am courageous enough to hold space for difficult conversations because it is a part of our job. Our job is to facilitate some of those really difficult conversations and not to shy away from them. And so I think that's really important. If I use that as a caveat, I mean, I want to say as it relates to leadership, that radical transparency in leadership is critical, and unfortunately for us as a nation that hasn't necessarily always been our experience. Hence these commissions and hence these fact-finding missions and kumbayas and everything else that's going on. And I think it's important for us to recognize, Doc, that there's a distinction between being interested in transparency and being committed to transparency, and often that's hard. That's hard because sometimes when we're faced with doing the right thing, people sometimes don't want to do the right thing. And that is an absolute reality. And so, if we look at the social stance of most organizations the last couple of months with all of the socio-economic and political issues, it really speaks to that, right? It speaks to radical transparency in leadership, and the reality for us as HR professionals is how do we keep our leaders accountable? There's a massive problem in our country around accountability. There's a massive problem in our country around knowing that things are going pear-shaped and things are going horrendously wrong, and we take comfort in looking the other way because it's not our problem. And we've become comfortable operating in these spaces, and whether this is from a corporate perspective, whether if it's even on a social perspective, like if you look at the femicide stats, right, and the domestic violence, right, how many of us have lived next to a neighbor where there's a perpetrator right next door and we've done nothing about it? We didn't pick up the phone to phone 10-111. We didn't call the security guard in our estate. We did nothing. And so we also have to accept and hold ourselves accountable and say that we are also complicit. We are complicit to the chaos that has happened in our land. We have to take accountability. But there is a great problem in accountability in our nation. And I think whilst I say that, I think the tide is shifting. I think we are all enough of, I think, just sort of where things have been, and I'm really starting to see and hear less of an echo chamber, because for a long time, really, it was one big echo chamber, right? We all sang from the same hymn sheet. We all had our allegiance to loyalty to certain organizations because of our past and our predisposition. And I think now is the time for us to really truly take a stand if we want to secure a safe future for our children. Whilst I may not be the spokesperson, I think for all HR people, I will say now more than ever is the time for us to really, really put our shoulder to the wheel and hold our leaders accountable. I spoke earlier about the difference between screening for experience and screening through resumes, and for the longest time, sometimes with senior appointments, and I must be very careful how I phrase this, because this could be taken as controversial, so I must be very careful how I phrase it. But I think it's been easy sometimes to make recommendations or to make hires based on people's resume and not necessarily who people are. Right, and the reality is that there are some of us who've got sterling resumes, but at the core of who we aren't the greatest people. We sometimes aren't the greatest cultural fits to organizations that bring us in, but often our resumes get us through the door, and of course then we get through the door, and then of course we wreak havoc. And so it is also time for us to hold ourselves accountable. Go ahead, Doc.
Yeah, I just wanted to chip in there because the point you are making is so vital. I was listening to the guy who at Lead Factor, and he was talking about when we promote now, we need to make sure that we promote managers that have a track record of creating psychological safety, because of the many things that have happened in corporates and in organizations in general. And that if we don't look at, is this fellow or this woman, does he have a track record, or does she have a track record of creating psychological safety for people so that people can be themselves? So I like the point that what are you screening? What do you use as a ruler to screen? I think it's important, and I like that point, yeah.
Yeah, and also, Doctor, I mean, to add on that, and perhaps I speak this through the lens of my own experience, right? The people that I serve are, the employees, and yes, the business as well. And for me, it's a job I take incredibly seriously, and it really is one of the most amazing job. And so my approach isn't that I do it because it's a job that pays the bills, but really for me, it's an extension of who I am. And so where I can, in the spaces that I move in, I want to foster a healthy environment of communication, a healthy environment of, I think, upholding our code of conduct. All organizations typically have a code of conduct. How many of us really, truly uphold it? Right. And and if we're not, then perhaps that's the beginning of the conversation, right? So then what do we need, right? Do HR people need to be empowered more? Is the pushback from business justified? What is the actual problem? But like as I said, most organizations really do have a code of conduct. But I think it's also important that that we also assign cross-functional executives to be sponsors of some of these codes of conduct, right? So they are able to hold each other accountable. Then I think making the expectation of maybe a junior HR person who may not be seasoned or have the courage of an Andy to hold a leader accountable, right? So what other mechanisms have we put in place to build that bridge? Because the reality is that not all organizations can afford the luxury, I think, of having too many senior HR people in the business, or even one at all.
Earlier on, Dr. Gule spoke about us being responsible for bringing the characters we are talking about that into the business that do not fit the culture or the profile of a good HR person. I want us go a little bit back from the development perspective and say, do we position the HR profession for what it is, when we encourage our mentees during our career mentorship programs to opt for HR. So I almost feel like this is HR is one of the easy to go for professions, and yet one of the most difficult to practice. So now, if people come out of the pipeline of education and only wake up to realize that this job is more than what I have thought. So for the sake of our country, or for even the bigger world, as HR professionals, we need to play a role in really mentoring young people when they decide to take this profession, because it is a hard profession.
Very hard.
There's no script. You wake up in the morning, the rubber hits the ground. You don't even remember what you learned at school or the university, and everybody say, fix it. And then you start to hate your profession. Now you're sitting with a number of people who don't like what they're doing, but they have to do it anyway because it is a way of getting money. And then you have a problem. The company now does not get return on investment, or the country does not get return on investment. And I think it's for that reason that this platform that we are putting together with IPM hopefully will influence and encourage the right type of people with the right personality to go into this profession. Because if I listen to you and I really get this energy that's coming out of you, the passion with which you're talking through the issues, I think that is not always the case. When you walk into corridors of companies, you meet HR people, you can see these people are just doing the job. I'm generalizing. There are many of us in the IPM, in the many other fraternities. You can tell we love what we do, irrespective. But I think we can do much better with more people that really understand what it is. It's about serving. It's about supporting business.
Yeah.
It's about dealing with the most difficult aspects of people's existence in the corporates. What is your view on that?
I think if I draw back from my own experience, I had the honor and the privilege, I think, of being mentored by someone who was incredibly generous. And I think one of the first pieces of advice that I was given was the importance of job rotation. And so, so I've pretty much worked right through the employee life cycle. And perhaps that's why I can stand here, as a people leader and as a generalist. But, I've gone from talent acquisition, I've worked in, change management, working with analytics. I've worked in, transformation. I've worked in learning and development. I've worked in, an OD. So I've done a lot of it, and and I've taken all of those years across multiple industries to now be the people leader that I am today. So I think for me, my call out is, for young HR professionals, don't be too quick to become a specialist in your early in career years. I think diversify. I think change industries, change functions, change the businesses that you support. I think sometimes people fall into comfort zones, right? So for people in financial services, they end up working, for 15 years across all 4 banks. So all they know is financial services, right? You can bring, or consulting, right? People who then work for the Accentures of the world and the Deloittes, et cetera, and they fall into a comfort. And so the thing that served me well was, I think, being open to change, embracing what that change is, but I think really just collect my experience from different pockets and from different industries, and that has served me well. But I do want to say that someone made the comment earlier around for the longest time HR professionals have worked in silos, and whilst I agree and disagree with that, I do also wish to say to the listeners who are HR professionals is that we were also part of the problem, right? We perpetuated that perception that we sit in the behind offices or whatever. And really, for me, my call out is find spaces and ways to create a seat at the table for the people agenda. And if that doesn't exist, go and create another table that has that seat at that table. and it's really important. And where you're not sure, or I mean, for me, even till this day, I get in touch, with people like Doc. I've learned a great deal from, my peer Julia Modise from Bridgestone, right? So she works in tire manufacturing, very different to technology. But I've learned a great deal from her. I think understanding what she's done in her business. They went and closed down their flagship plant in Port Elizabeth, which is where I'm from, and just the work that they did, not only just around the Section 189s, but also just ensuring that a lot of the people that were laid off were actually absorbed by other businesses in that manufacturing value chain system. And so, I think we really need to be open, I think, to what learning is, and outside of our little industries and silos. And whilst I work in technology, and sometimes, people feel like, oh, you guys are ahead of the curve, there's been loads of, pertinent lessons I've learned from colleagues who don't come from my field.
Beautiful. The other point that we wanted you to address was how do you measure the performance when people are not in one place and you don't see them every day? I guess it's an obvious question, but I think we are suggesting that could be a challenge. If you are so used to seeing people and then you take that as being doing the right thing, performing.
Look, what I'll tell you for free is I'm glad the myth of the office has been debunked. There's been, for the greater part of humanity, the myth that when people are physically in the office, that they're working. I know many people who come in at 7:30 in the morning and they're playing on their computers, and they leave at 5 o'clock with very little output. They're the first people in, they were last people out. Sometimes it's been because of a commute issue. They live too far, so they need to come in early, etc., etc. But I think what the pandemic has shown us is that people can be fully productive, outside of the four walls of the office. And in fact, I think we've seen people work a lot more. I think I've seen a lot more people put their hands up to have stretch assignments. I think our stretch assignment roster is the healthiest it's ever looked. And that's because, the people who live alone, who have a little bit more time, are putting their hands up to do more work. Historically, they would have been at the canteen chatting away. They would have been going desk to desk, having, conversations. And I think whilst that's great for culture, and I think that's great for, for people connecting. I think, look, perhaps because our business, we're in a very different model in terms of, we're working with technology. And so you can kind of, at a very quick glance, get a sense of who's performing and who's not. There's a lot of tools that are built into what we do, and just sort of the touch points in terms of logging in the work that you're doing. That data is also looking the healthiest it's been in years. And I think for me, I do want to say this, because I know the conversation these days is also around, the going back to the office, and, people who aren't, as disciplined to work from home, et cetera, et cetera. And I think my call out to leaders is that I think let's be honest. People have worked during this pandemic. People have worked in the height of their biggest trauma, right? We've worked, we've delivered on our outputs, and I think we really need to revisit. I think the myth of all of us congregating in one space for us to achieve our shared goals and values. There's more than one way to skin the cat. The pandemic has shown us at least 10. So we really need to be tapping into them. Really. We really, really need to.
So the fears that were there are non-existent. It's been a long time that employees asked to be given the opportunity to work from home for various reasons. Mothers, people are looking after the ill, the elderly, and they've always said, no, you have to be in the office. Our roads, our highways are healthiest ever in the mornings and in the evenings. And people are working harder and longer than ever. So people are also surprising themselves. I think it will be good to have a research post this era to find out how much self-discovery we've made in terms of how good we work without the boss breathing down our necks.
Yeah, and to your point, Sam, right? The reality is that our homes are like those are our safe spaces, and so perhaps it's been easier to get out a lot more output, right? Anyone who knows me knows I'm a foodie. I cook a lot. I've strategized while I was making pancakes for my children, for 6 months straight, because I was homeschooling, etc., etc. But I was able, I think, to tap into that space because I was relaxed, right? And I think the same can be said for many people, and granted, I think there have been people maybe who are toddlers or younger children who are a little bit more disruptive, where it was a challenge. But for the most part, like our homes are our safe spaces. Now, the thing we need to guard against is that what the pandemic has then subsequently created. So to my point around, like we're working more, is that we have to now be careful because we're now living in an era where we are living at work. And so we need to find now ways how to regulate that, right? So before you could compartmentalize, right? I'm in my home, I'm in my car, I'm dropping children off at school, I've got my commute to the office, I'm at the, you could compartmentalize these things. And right now, for a lot of us, we are living at work. And so we have to be very careful. So going back to George's question around about mental wellness, right? So how many of our leaders are encouraging people to take time off? Right. So if I'm seeing an email at 11 p.m., I question it. I have no expectation for someone to email me at 11. Please get some sleep, be with your family. For the people who are mothers, between 5 and 7, I don't expect anyone to be online. My question is always, I'm like, aren't you making dinner for your children? Aren't you making dinner for your family? So, those things are really important.
Wow.
We bosses are lonely. That's why we want to chase people and all the time want to see where they are. But here is a question before George comes in, Andisa. Here is a question. So we're saying people have performed, they've done well. Are we then saying two questions? Are we paying the bonuses in this pandemic, or what are we doing? And secondly, second question is. Okay, so this whole thing has had to do with how people are performing and all that, how people are working. Are we keeping those performance management systems that we've had from years ago, or are we dumping those and coming up with something new?
Definitely throw them away. Definitely throw them away because they're no longer serving us as well. I think to my previous point around people taking up more work in terms of stretch assignments, joining other teams and taking on more, the systems we had before didn't necessarily, I think, have enough bandwidth to capture some of that data. Right. And so what you would have then is you'd have an Andy who does her job, Andy who does PR and marketing and everything in between. And, you get around the table and it is, okay, from a scale of 1 to 5, how well did you do your actual job that we hired you to do? Because there's a rigid job description that sits against your name. And the expectation is that we need to dot the I's and to cross the T's as it relates purely on this thing. The downside to that is then you miss out on the value, the true value that someone has added to your organization. So we definitely need to throw those 9 blocks and all of these wonderful things that worked 10 years ago. They no longer are serving us. The 9 block just is not working for the new era that we're in. That's the reality. Doc, sorry, what was your other question? I know you asked 2 questions. My apologies. You're on mute, Doc.
I think the first question he asked was, are we paying the bonuses now that we are saying people have performed very well? You answered the second question, but there was the first question.
Right. Got it. No wonder I answered the easy one first. No wonder. Makes Look, I don't think there's been a right and a wrong way of doing it. I think for many companies, I think we've all been in a survival boat more so than in a thriving boat. And I think whilst it would be unfair to employees, I think, who went over and above, we have to also recognize that, we have been in an economic downturn. I spoke earlier about what the last 11 years from a GDP perspective and what that growth looked like, and it was the healthiest, decade we had seen in a long while. Right at the north of that is, we then went through the dip. And some of these costs have to be accounted for, right? So whilst people still went to work at home, the OPEX cost didn't change that much, right? We still had to pay rentals for the offices that we lived in. We still had to pay whether we were leasing physical machines that were not being in use, et cetera, et cetera. So some of those costs haven't necessarily changed. In fact, in some industries, there's been a downturn. So if you look at tourism, for example, right? The global shutdowns, almost shut down that entire industry because nobody was moving. And so, so I think we have to be realistic. And I know it's a very tough conversation to have with people, I think, who have families to feed. And who have become accustomed, I think, to a certain style of remuneration, as I think it relates to bonus and incentives, and perhaps for us it's an opportunity. I don't want to say to reimagine remuneration, because I think there's value in rewarding people for good work in the form of a financial bonus that, and it's going to be the interesting space with HR professionals that I almost want to jump out and say, don't reinvent the wheel too far, right? So don't go and take a physical bonus and start giving out spa vouchers or something, right? The money is important. We have to recognize that. Money is important, and there's still an expectation for people to get their bonuses. The last year, I think for most companies, bonuses just, wasn't a thing that was paid out, because I think the bigger priority was the overall retention of the payroll as much as possible. And just to simply keep things afloat. And so I think it's important that we all kind of come to some kind of a common understanding, albeit it's very difficult, I think, to explain that to someone who maybe was working 16-hour days for 7 months, right? How do you have that conversation? And so I can't say I've got the answer. The likes of George, who very nice consulting offices over there. I'll be very interested to hear what's going on at Vula Consulting. I'm putting you on the spot, George. Sorry.
Listen, what the world has done is, yes, people are working longer hours, working from home. I think I would say as far as 90% of the people really who are still employed put in much more hours, put much more work into it because of the realization of the situation they are in. Did that result in higher revenues for the businesses? That's obviously going to be contextualized. But if it does, then there's room there to reward them. But I was going to take you away slightly from the bonuses that we're talking about and ask you about something that we didn't ask, just for my own understanding, the size of Cisco in your region in terms of people numbers. How many people are we talking about in your region?
Gosh, so just Cisco blue badge employees in our world is permanent staff members. We're maybe north of 300, and we probably have doubled that number in terms of either consultants or people that work through us through our SMMEs or otherwise through our channels. So Cisco representatives that would sit at a Dimension Data or at a Microsoft or at a Kijima, Makwa IT, and the likes. There's a lot more.
Oh, okay. And in terms of percentage, really rough percentage contribution to the revenue for the whole Cisco, What percentage are we? I asked that deliberately.
Oh, you're gonna get me in trouble now.
My next question would be, maybe I can ask it now, in terms of where do you see your projection? Where do you see employee numbers in the future for Cisco? Do you see that trajectory going up? Do you see a reduction, taking into account artificial intelligence and all that? So I'm asking now, what percentage do we contribute as this region?
Gosh, I'm not at liberty to give that number. But let me perhaps frame it differently. I mean, look, if you look at Africa, right? From an emerging markets perspective of the other two, which is India or otherwise Asia. I mean, so we're definitely ahead of the growth curve. And so what I will categorically say is that Cisco is definitely investing. Africa, we're starting to see a lot more investment in terms of digital acceleration. We've just launched our digital acceleration program about, probably just before the pandemic hit, which was a sizable $1 million amount into the continent. And a lot of that has to do really with, I think, the surge of the SMMEs. I think there's a greater appetite from a technology perspective. I think, we're starting to see, Africa has got the largest informal sector in the world, right? So if you look at the township economy, right, and how that's grown substantially the last 5 years, and you're seeing a lot of businesses, I think, needing, a lot more secure networking, and I think a lot of our product offering. And so that in itself is a brand new market, I think, that we are, we're really going in. And I think the same can be said with West Africa, with Nigeria, the top, growing market in Africa. But I think it's also important for us to recognize that, Africa is made out of many states, right? And a lot of them are not homogeneous, right? I think there's very distinct nuances to how things are done in the East, West, South, and North of Africa. But I think from a growth perspective, in terms of Cisco's priority, Africa is definitely right up there. We're showing significant growth. There's great uptake in our product offering. Again, we're seeing a lot of the SMME community growing quite substantially. And that, I think, for us is giving us the comfort. The other day, Makwa IT, got gold Cisco certification, and that's a difficult thing to attain as an organization. And to think that a company of a bunch of young South African males who started it, now has that certification that often takes companies in the Western world years to attain, is also a testament, I think, to the transformation and the work that we're doing on the ground. And I think, to start seeing some of the results. So I'm sorry I'm giving you a somewhat ambiguous answer.
But Andisa, sure. I'm looking at your profile, and I have to bring this in as the last question from my side, because we're going towards the end of our show. We did say we want to talk about, over and above employee wellness, we want to talk about a work-life balance for the HR professionals, because they are working under extreme pressures, and it's important for HR to take care of itself. And I look at your CV, and I can see that you have quite diverse areas of involvement. Most of them have nothing to do with HR, and I guess that's how you bring that balance. The 3 points I want to mention from your profile is that you served as a guest lecturer at Vets Art School quarterly. Here you're speaking to fourth-year students. And then I see also that you are a regular, or you have been a keynote speaker at the Work 2.0 conference, Africa's Definitive Work. I don't know whether that was once off or that is something that you do regularly. And of course, lastly, your passion for climbing mountains. I don't know if that's the right way to use you're a mountaineer, let me put it that way. And that's sport for you. So it says in her spare time, Andisa is an avid mountaineer who has summited Kilimanjaro and will now be attempting all 7 highest peaks of the world to raise funds and awareness for caring for girls, an NGO that provides sanitary towels to young girls in disadvantaged areas around, and is currently training for an expedition to Base Camp Everest that was supposed to be in April 2020. And you have just told us because of COVID-19, you will do that next year. You have recommitted to do it next year. I'm like, wow, that looks like a template of a perfect HR executive in a high-tech, very highly busy organization like Cisco.
I must say, very impressed with the mountains.
Yeah. And that probably will be more or less you are rounding up because we have 5 more minutes and then we are done.
Yeah, I think first things first, I believe in the power of giving back. I believe it's important for us that once we get to certain levels, whatever that level may be, that we send the elevator down to others. I don't believe in hogging the elevator. And so I think a lot of the work, I mean, whether I'm speaking at the Wits Art School because I'm a lover of arts, or, at some of the conferences, I really believe in the power of imparting knowledge, and I think others learning through some of my experience. And as I said, I started out in my career with a very generous mentor, which I'm eternally grateful for. And I think that's also allowed me to really drive the give back message. I believe in order for me to show up as a consummate professional, or otherwise as a mother to my children, or a sister to my sisters, or a friend, I think it's important that I fill up my own glass. And mountaineering and being close to nature allows me that. When I come back renewed with a renewed sense of self, and renewed zeal for life. And I'm able, I think, to then take that energy and to do all of these other things. So that is for me where I charge my batteries. And so it's important, I think, before we go and seek to look after others, that we look after ourselves first. And the pandemic for me was also a reminder of that. I got ill about a week before we went into lockdown. I had, a massive surgery, around a breast cancer scare. And I was out of action, for the first couple of weeks of the pandemic. And whilst it could have been easier for me to jump in and to want to help others, I had to learn how to put my own, as they say when we fly, don't try and be a hero, put your own life jacket first. And the pandemic has taught me that whilst it's easy for me to show compassion to others, but I also had to learn how to receive. And so I think my call out also to the HR professionals is that, learn how to receive help, ask for help. I think where you're not sure, you're not certain, you've got complex business issues, and sure, some of them may be highly confidential, but I think align yourself with trusted experts in the field that you can trust, that can serve as your guide and as your counselor, because that will serve you well. We grow through learning through others. We don't grow in isolation of things. And so, so I've had, the pleasure of, having the likes of Doc, to a myriad of other people that come from very different industries that, I can pick up the phone and just simply call them and just say, hey, I need your help. And they have shown up for me. And so I continue to show up for others.
Wow. Thank you very much. We're running out of time. 2 minutes, Dr. Gule and George, 1 minute each to just wrap up the show for us.
Yeah, no, listen, this has been really, really wonderful. And I'm hoping that the HR professionals out there, the line managers, would have picked up some very useful ideas from what Andy had to say to us, for people around the world, because really we are here. This is not a dress rehearsal. If we have roles and we're fortunate, we're privileged to still have roles and work with people, let's bring our best game, our A game all the time. So this has really been wonderful. I think Andy is an example of that. That's how it should be done. So very proud to be associated with this HR professional, and I hope we'll be bringing more to talk to us in the coming days. Thank you.
Thank you very much. George, 1 minute.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andisa, for enlightening us about Cisco and its activities in Africa. It's a huge organization, and these are the investments that we need in our countries here in Africa. So well done for a great job that you're doing there. And hopefully we'll have you back for part 2.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, colleagues, listeners, viewers at home. This was our Human Resources Development and Management 101 conversation brought to you by COMETSA and the Institute of People Management, IPM. Thank you. Until next time, take care and be safe.